Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Um, hello. You look wonderful. It's a
Thank you. You
privilege.
too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It is a privilege to talk to you. You are the executive producer of the sit-in, The Tonight Show. Harry Belafonte hosts The Tonight Show. This documentary was so impactful and meaningful, and I felt so kind of like ashamed that I just didn't know this. But it was Johnny Carson took 1 week. It was during a time in the 60s of great turbulence, and he handed his show over to Harry Belafonte and to other Black voices and creators and politicians, and also to Martin Luther King to talk about the issues that was going on in society. My question is, for you, what was it about this documentary and this project that spoke directly to you?
Well, 1968 was an extremely momentous year in U.S. history, right? I mean, and what's really poignant about the film is that this was February of 1968, and just months later, both Dr. King and then 1 month after that, or a month and a half after that, Robert Kennedy Jr. were dead and assassinated. This was a year of assassinations. It was a year of tremendous change. It was in just the years after the Voting Rights Act, which we just lost John Lewis. It was just a few years after the Civil Rights Act. This was an incredibly turbulent era. It was the Nixon era. It was the beginning of the Southern Strategy era. And so you had a lot of everything from riots in the wake of Dr. King's death, and before that. And most of the riots that you saw in the late 1960s were because of police killing a Black man. Black Lives Matter was in full effect in 1968 and in the late 1960s. So this was quite a time for Johnny Carson to make the decision to cede a week of incredibly valuable, probably the most valuable airtime in the business, late night, which was incredibly powerful. Johnny Carson being probably the most popular and powerful person on television other than Walter Cronkite. To give that to this Black actor, this Black Hollywood figure who was also known as a civil rights figure, an outspoken civil rights figure, knowing what that could mean, and knowing that his audience could rebel and could refuse, that the sponsors could rebel, that NBC could say, hell no. It was brave on both of their parts. And so I think it's a story of generosity. It's a story of taking risks and the benefit of it. And it's a story of courage on the part of Mr. Belafonte to take that week and make of it something more than entertainment, because he made it poignant, he made it meaningful, he made it historic.
And one of the interesting aspects is that Harry Belafonte received a lot of backlash later on. But somehow Johnny Carson, even though it was his show, he didn't get that. He's still revered. He still had a show going on. So I was wondering, why do you think that that was the case with Johnny Carson? Because they could have easily, canceled it.
Well, no, I see, the thing about Johnny Carson is that he did this at the point when he was already really at the peak of his power,
Right.
and because he was where he was is why he could even give Mr. Belafonte the show. But there would be no firing Johnny Carson. That would never happen. I mean, this guy was late night. There really wasn't a plan B late night. There wasn't anything else. When Johnny Carson finally handed over the reins to someone else, all of the country held their breath to figure out who could possibly inherit the Tonight Show seat. That's how powerful the Tonight Show was. And so I think the reason he didn't get backlash was A, because of that power, and two, he was a white man, in a country run by white men almost entirely. You think about it, in the 1960s, there were almost no women, there were almost no people of color, there were certainly no Black people that were in those kinds of positions. And so both Harry Belafonte and Johnny Carson were talking to rooms full of white men about what they were going to do. And so I think it was incredibly brave, again, for both of them to do what they did. And also the country learned something. They were forced. Listen, this was an hour everyone was watching TV. They were in front of their TVs, sort of the way we are in front of our Zooms and our TVs now because of COVID. People were in front of their TVs at night. That's what people did. They watched late night. And so for 1 week, they had the opportunity to learn something new about race, to learn something new about themselves, their country, and what it was really like for Black people to live in it. That is so important.
So that week, it was very impactful for the entire country as a whole. I was also kind of wondering, well, I'm looking at the show, I'm kind of looking at today in our present, and there's a lot of progress that was made. and there's a lot of progress that still needs to be made. There's points where it's like, oh, that's kind of still the same. Oh dear. So I was wondering how, even though we've come so far, how do we still continue to create that space to get people from all over to listen to us?
Yeah, it's difficult because there are certain ways in which things have obviously changed a lot, right? There are a lot more Black people in, you know, positions like Oprah is in, like Ava DuVernay is in. You know, there are a lot more prominent African Americans. You think about sports, you have your LeBron Jameses that have the power to use their voice in a really big way. But, you know, we still don't have more than 5% of CEOs who are Black. The late night space still only has one Black host. You know, a lot has not changed, right? The entertainment space has changed, but has it changed at the CEO level? No, not really. You know, if you think about it, we've managed to get into the front of the bus, but the bus is still not largely filled with us, you know, and not just us, but brown folks, indigenous folks, you know, immigrants of color, Muslims. There's a lot left to do in this country. And so, yes, we've made change, but this week showed that we're capable of doing more than we think, but that we still have to do a lot more to put some distance between that history and what we have now.
So by being part of this documentary, do you feel that it's taught you something about yourself that you never knew?
Well, it definitely taught me that you know, I think of myself as a history nerd and a history buff and knowing a lot. But this was an opportunity to really learn something, because I really didn't know this history at all before. You know, Joan Walsh told me about this article she'd written about Harry Belafonte hosting the Tonight Show. I'd never heard of it, and so it definitely taught me that there's so much more to learn. It fired up my nerd impulses and made me want to go into many more deep wormholes of America's entertainment history, which intersects so much with our civil rights history.
Now, as host of the readout, I was kind of wondering, is there anyone in particular that you really look to towards guidance, whether it's past or present, when you go and you format your show?
Well, I mean, you know, in general, I've said this a lot, that, you know, Gwen Ifill was sort of my kind of hero growing up, because she was really the only person. She and Carol Simpson were the only Black women that I saw, you know, on TV. So I gravitated toward them as people that I really looked up to and still really do look up to, and who both hosted, you know, on the network side, in this, you know, the same day parts that I'm doing. But I think generally now, you know, the job that I'm doing is so different from what they did. They were doing straight ahead news, and, you know, I have a lot more freedom. I feel a lot luckier in a lot of ways, because I have the freedom to be an opinion journalist, to have a take, you know, on things. I think if I were restricted to not having a take, my head would probably explode seeing some of the things that are happening out there. So I feel very blessed to be able to look to those women as great examples of what I'm doing, but expand upon it in my own way.
So when we watch the documentary, as a whole, when we look at it, we take it away. I'm sorry, when we watch the documentary, it is easy at times to get discouraged, because there's a lot of things that's going on, and you still look out today, and there's still kind of that same thing. What is it that you hope that people from all races kind of take away from this documentary in order to, one, to better themselves and to better each other?
I would say what I would take away from it is take a risk, right? Because again, Mr. Carson and Mr. Belafonte both took an incredible risk, and make it count. You know, Harry Belafonte could have taken that week and done entertainment. You know, he could have had on jugglers and hula dancers, and, you know, he could have just made it entertaining and maybe culturally, you know, exciting, and shown different cultures in the entertainment field, and, you know, shown different, you know, sort of, you know, bring forward different diasporal elements, but that were all about entertainment. But he chose instead to make it hardcore, and he chose to make it blunt, and he chose to make it honest, and he chose to make it about where we were as a country at that time, politically and socially, and to be unapologetic about that. So I think if we take those things from the documentary, it's a great idea to do that. You know, take a risk, make it count. Don't, you know, once you have your foot in the door, make your presence known, because you really can change things. Things have incrementally changed since that era because of people who took chances.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Dana.
Appreciate it.